it's a little bit of sociological analysis real quickly.
Okay.
Okay. So this book, 9/11 and American Empire, Intellectuals Speak Out, edited by David Ray Griffin and Peter Dale Scott. Peter Phillips has a chapter in here with Bridget Thornton and Celeste Vogler titled Parameters of Power in the Global Dominance Group, 9/11 and Election Irregularities in Context. And it's the final chapter in here. And it's really good, and it lays out the sociological parameters of what you all titled the
global dominance group.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, because with sort of the Obama administration coming in, what I think you all do very interestingly is define a split in this what we might call the elite establishment. One that is maybe a softer line that you might describe as neoliberal, and then one that is a harder line in terms of militarism, which you might describe as neoconservative. And you describe sort of the differences in terms of people who worked under Clinton and people who might have worked under Bush or both Bushes. So would you describe a little bit about these tensions that you see inside of a global dominance project?
Well, the Clinton administration, their way of dealing with the military-industrial complex was to try to maximize their profits and continue to have high profits. So they did a couple of things. One, they allowed the big mergers to occur. That's where we get Lockheed and Martin and Northrop and Grumman coming together as one big giant corporations. And they continued to fund and spend money. I mean, there wasn't this peace dividend after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. It went down a little bit and they continued. But then they aggressively went out worldwide to market U.S. weapons. So we went from being 16%, beginning of Clinton's administration, we were 16% of the global arms trade. We went up to 2/3 of the global arms trade by the time Clinton left. So that was what Ron Brown was doing, running around the world as Secretary of Commerce until he got assassinated, probably. And it was a military move to make these companies more profitable. They still weren't happy, so they were the ones. Half of the people in the Project for New American Century had come from Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, or had been affiliated with them in some way. So they're writing, we want to continue to see military expansion, 7-8% a year, and that we'll need a new Pearl Harbor to get the American people to go along with it. And we want to dominate the world by controlling the internet and controlling weapons from space and being able to overpower anybody militarily in the world. So that was their agenda. They laid that out 10 years ago, and they've pretty much been implementing it through the Bush administration. But it doesn't look like that's going to change. I mean, keeping Gates in, who was right in our global dominance list as Secretary of Defense, doesn't look like that's going to be a major factor. It may be a softer approach. Maybe we'll use more diplomacy before we invade countries. But there'll still be an approach to exercising our power that's quite there and existing. So when you get into the elites, I mean, part of doing the global dominance study, and it kind of came out of the 9/11 community because they kept saying, well, they did this and they did that. Well, my background is power elite studies, so I go, okay, let's put some parameters on they. Who are the people advocating for military global dominance, who are in the companies, who are in the policy groups, who's on their boards of directors, and we just made a list of them. And it's a good solid list of people, and there's probably more people outside it, and other people, and some that aren't as serious inside it, but it's still a way of examining sociologically where power is focused and how it's being implemented and who's advocating for its use. So
where can people find this list?
It's in that book right there. It's also on our website. That study in there, it's on our website, the Global Dominance Group. So ProjectCensored.org, it's there too. We published it in a couple other books too.
It's interesting that you're talking about 10 years ago, all these these plans were openly discussed in terms of stepping up military dominance. Like, I think 96 was the year that Space Command, U.S. Space Command, put out a 2020 vision, right?
Exactly.
And they talk about full spectrum
Carl
dominance.
Grossman writing about that, yeah.
And I think that was the same year that they put out the Clean Break paper, which was Netanyahu basically commandeering Pearl and Fife and some of the neocon guys to write about a new strategy of securing the realm. So it's very interesting that that these plans that get implemented under a Bush administration are all openly advocated for during the Clinton administration.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you put a global dominance group in context, it's Democrat, Republican, both. Now, whether it's Zabrinsky doing the plans with Carter to entice the Russian, funding the Taliban in Afghanistan as a counter to the pro-Soviet government that was there, and getting the Russians to invade as part of trying to bankrupt the Soviet Union, and then applauding themselves as a strategy when the Soviet Union collapses partly because of that. Whether it's that kind of a strategy or it's more overt, you just invade when you can, and you invade countries that can't really, give you much difficulty. And the difficulty becomes the occupation afterwards, where there's continued resistance. But you can invade anybody, literally. And
don't you think there's a possibility they want that difficulty, that they might even be creating the difficulty because they're making such a profit that the longer the occupation goes, the more money they make?
I think that's very true. I think that the strategy of the global dominance group, their operatives, the CIA and national security forces, is to basically balkanize the world. You get a lot of little countries that are dependent upon the U.S. and NATO as a dominant police force and influence. And that's why we spend so much time breaking up Yugoslavia. That was a Clinton agenda. And that's why we're still, extremely desirous to return Cuba to the capitalist, agenda and open it up. Yugoslavia was a socialized government, primarily means of production-owned country that was the very effect was working well. So between the Germans and the U.S. and inciting what had been ethnic differences going back centuries, funding them, actually pulling in after the collapse in Afghanistan and the Russians pulled out, pulling in Taliban to fight on the behalf of Muslims in Bosnia in '92 to counter the Serbs, and then they see the Serbs as almost as Russians. You multiplied the war using the KLA as a Kosovo Liberation Army, which really was a drug organization. It had been named that many years before, supplying half the heroin to Europe through Afghanistan. These were groups that we used to break up what we saw as a socialist communist agenda. Those are, that kind of socialism is going to continue. It's happening and certainly happening in South America today, but very democratically. And that's the elites, the capitalist elites, don't like that. They don't want to see a grassroots democratic movement. They want to see real democracy in the U.S. I mean, we wouldn't be voting $1 trillion bailout to the banks. I mean, our local bank, which lost money on real estate investment deal, got $50 million, and it's like taxpayer money that goes to a private bank, so they can do whatever they want with it. Literally, we wouldn't be democratically approving that.